Chapter 4. The cloud had grown darker and rain sprinkles had begun to hit the pier. A large raindrop hit the deck in front of me. That raindrop must have been the size of a quarter, I thought to myself, as I motioned for Jimmy and Chris to make their way to the boat. My mom had already informed us that the rain would soon be upon us and that we should return to the boat. We were enjoying the time we spent on the pier and were determined that the last minute would be soon enough to make the quick jaunt. I sat in the boat under the canopy, in the passenger seat. My brothers were in the cabin because the rain was going to last at least a little while. My mom and dad took turns sitting in the driver's seat and standing attempting to keep the rain running off the top from drenching them. It was only about a 2-foot chop, against the pier, with 5 people on it. That 18-feet boat was rocking and bumping. When the light rain had dissipated, I quickly removed myself off the boat and onto the pier, out of the close quarters company of my younger brothers. The pier was now only slightly warm to the feet, even cool in places. People were starting to make their way back onto the pier when I saw Chris burst out of the cabin access. He was yelling like a shark had him, and I was certain Jimmy was still entertaining him with another one of his silly games. Jimmy had always been handy to have around to keep Chris or any young child entertained. He knew the games they loved, and when he didn't, he always had this awesome ability to pretend. I really believe that most of the time he had as much fun as Chris did, and that most of his pleasure came from the happiness of the children around him. The man with the cast net startled me when he dropped the net down on the pier. He had picked a new spot a little further down the pier. I was not sure that it would matter after the rain, but that was not something I thought was necessary to bring to his attention. It was then that I heard my father say, "Jimmy, Chris, do you want to walk back up to the fort with Ralph and I to see if it is open?" My brothers wasted no time getting up onto the pier as if to let my dad know that they were ready yesterday. The pier was much cooler due to the rainfall, but I remembered my water bottle just the same. The tour guide still had not made a presence, not that I could tell anyway. The big steel gate had a chain hanging down from it with a large lock hanging from one of its links. I pushed on the door and it opened slowly with a squeal. I looked around inside as it opened, thinking for sure that someone had heard it and would soon be corralling us back out onto the pier. Surprisingly, no one had approached us. We quickly made our way through the fort and up the spiral staircases, heading towards the part of history that was of most interest to us. Jimmy was climbing along the barrel of one of the cannons on the top of Fort Massachusetts when my father arose out of the staircase we had previously scaled. "Y'all need to slow down, you're going to get hurt," he exclaimed. My father walked to the north side of the fort and carefully examined the skies. By then, I had requisitioned my own cannon and enlisted Chris as my number one. It wasn't until I began to hoist Chris up onto the wheel that I heard my dad sigh and say, "Well, it doesn't look good, that's for sure." With both legs wrapped around the barrel, I had worked my way all the way to the end and stretched both arms into the air in triumph. I twisted my feet together, leaned back, and looked up at the clouds. We had been unenthusiastically anticipating their arrival all morning. The daunting clouds still seemed eons away, but I could tell that space was still leaking through. The skies were sinisterly turning dark and seemed to be growing right in front of my eyes. My dad allowed us to climb on the cannons for about 15 more minutes while he adoringly took pictures of his boys. I was raising Chris up so he could hang from the barrel when I heard my dad say, "Let's go, guys, your mom is waiting for us at the boat." The 3 of us, with my dad close behind, flew down the stairs and like we were maneuvering through our own house. We effortlessly worked our way through the dark rooms and passageways, across the courtyard that resided in the middle of the fort and through the unsecured gate that led back to the pier. It had not rained again since we left the boat, and although it had gotten cloudier, the storm seemed to be staying on the mainland. I knew for certain it had not rained via the built-in thermometers in the soles of my feet. My feet were currently still graciously thanking me for taking away the earlier intolerable pain. As we walked back down the pier towards the boat, I noticed 2 young girls. They were both wearing 2-piece bathing suits. The taller girl had long blonde hair and was wearing a blue swimsuit that elegantly matched the bow that tied up her hair into a ponytail. She looked to be about 13, and to be assured she had caught my attention. She had a colorful beach ball that I was watching her tease the shorter girl with, when I heard my little brother wail out a note of his own. "Ralph's got a girlfriend," Chris had started singing behind me when he caught me looking at them. This had become a ritual with Chris, and I could count on him to embarrass me with this serenade every chance he got. The girls had heard his high-pitched chant as we passed, and I could hear them giggling as I sped up to get out of earshot. "Tell him to stop," I cried to my father as I moved over to Chris and pushed him from the back. "That's enough, both of you," my dad said as he grabbed my arm and pulled me to his side, using himself to separate the feud. My mother was sitting on the pier at the bow of the boat in a 2-piece black bathing suit. "What are you fishing for?" my dad asked with a smile, as he touched her shoulder, then proceeded to the back entrance of the boat. "I have to sit up here to get out of the shadow of that big boat," my mom replied. She continued to lavishly bathe in the warm rays bursting between the thick coverage of white clouds that had been ominously looming over the island. I did not come to the islands looking for shade any more than you came looking for bait fish, she spouted off with a big smile on her face. The mornings were not her friend, but after a cup of coffee, or 3, my stepmom was quite a blast. What do you think about the weather, Ralph? Do you think we will make it to Cat? My mother gently spoke, as she looked down at the water, casually swinging her feet. The sun had again broken through the clouds and I could see her dynamic silhouette surfing the waves in the water below. The clouds seemed to be moving west and it's not raining on Cat Island. My dad said in a slightly questionable tone. He then continued with a little more poise in his voice, I don't see why it should matter which island we are on if there is a storm. I spoke up immediately knowing I could be the tide-turning vote. I want to go to Cat Island and fish. There are no fish here. Let's go to Cat Island, Dad. Let's go. I exclaimed. Jimmy and Chris liked being on the dock much better than riding on the boat, but my enthusiasm had been enough to subconsciously ignite a hypnotic mantra. Let's go. Let's go. Let's go. My younger brothers unknowingly chanted as they proudly joined my cause. My father said, well, I guess it's unanimous if you're up for it, babe. My mom stuck her tongue out at my dad and said, okay, as long as you promise that there will be sun. There is always sun on the islands, he said with a laugh, as he looked up at the sky and informed us that it was time to get on the boat if we were going to make the trip.